I took the national counseling exam this weekend and I passed. A debrief on today's episode of Licensure Lifeline. This is your host, Matt Lawson, and I'm excited to go over my experience taking the NCE this past weekend and some things that I hope will help you pass the test. So let me give you a little background here. I created this podcast as a way to help me study for the test. One of the tenets of active learning is to teach what you learn, to teach as you learn. And it can really be helpful to help you memorize things and keep them top of mind. Also, I listen to my own podcast. I would take the podcast when I go to the gym, and it just gave me another layer that helped me study for the test. This is actually the second time I've taken the national counseling exam. I moved to Colorado a couple of years ago, and in order to get licensed here, I had to show my grade on the NCE. And even though I passed the first time I took the test several years ago, that score was considered too old in order for it to count toward licensure in this state. So I had to take the test over again. It was a bit of a different experience taking it for the second time like this. It has been close to 15 years since the last time I took it, and I've been practicing therapy for that time. So approaching this test from an experiential place versus a more theoretical stuff I learned in books was really interesting and different and helpful. Starting from the beginning, I signed up to take the test through Pearson VUE, which I'm pretty sure is what offers most of the test taking for this exam. And I actually opted to do their at-home testing. This is a new option that people have to take this test that definitely was not offered before the pandemic, but you can take the test now in the comfort of your own home, which was actually really nice. The day I signed up to take the test, which was several months ago, they had me download some software that did a test on my system to make sure the system would work. And it kind of took me through everything that I needed to do pre-test in order to set up the technology. It was not too hard to figure out. It was step by step. It walked you through everything. If you're not that technologically savvy, it's very easy to navigate this. I received an email a couple of days before my test to remind me about the test, and it had a link to do the software update again. The email recommends that you come on about 30 minutes to make sure that you're all set up, and it actually won't let you in to the testing site at least 30 minutes until the 30-minute mark before the test. It ended up taking me about 20 minutes to get it all set up, so I do recommend that you take that 30-minute time to get set up for the test, along with just making sure your system's ready to go. I had to close a bunch of different software that was running in the background that just I didn't even see, and it actually prompted me like 2 or 3 times. And at one point, I got a message that if I can't get this fixed, then I need to reschedule the test. But I managed to get it all fixed. At one point, it gave me a QR code that I had to use my mobile phone to read, and it took me through some things on a mobile phone, like I had to enter my phone number and things like that in case I needed to be contacted during the test. So it had me set things up there. Also, it had me take pictures with my phone of the space that I would be taking the test in. So it prompts you to take a picture of forward, side, and back in order to clear yourself to take the test in that area. From there, somebody actually called me, a proctor actually called me through my computer and had me take my webcam that was on my computer and show them around my space. And they were very diligent about anything that could potentially be used to cheat on the test be taken out of the area. I think at one point there was just a random book that I had on a side table next to my desk, and they're like, that needs to go away, even though the book had nothing to do with the test. But anything that was even close, no electronic devices could be anywhere near the desk. And they make you thoroughly like look around the area, the floor, your desktop. They're very, very diligent about checking the area. I was allowed to have some drinks, So I brought a couple cans of sparkling water that I just set near the desk. That actually ended up working against me, and I will talk more about that toward the end of this podcast. It's kind of funny what happened. So after all this clears, there's a couple more prompts on the computer screen and the test starts. I believe I had 255 minutes to take the test, and I did get a break at there's 200 questions on the test, and after you answer the first 100 question, it gives you the option of taking a 15-minute break. I used the time to get up, go to the restroom. I actually ended up only using like 5 minutes of the break, and then I was able to just go on and start the test again. The test questions were not tricky. And well, the trickiest thing that they did were, they'd have questions like that said things like, hey, which one of these modalities is not indicated for somebody that has autism? That was the extent of a question being at all tricky, is they would have that not statement in there, where if you're not reading the question careful enough, it can trip a lot of people up. I highly, highly, highly recommend, that's three highlies, recommend thoroughly reading the question and thoroughly reading the answers. That can definitely trip people up if they're not paying attention. Something else I noticed about the questions was I would say about 95% of the time, there was an obvious answer that just did not belong with that question. That was like blatantly just didn't belong with that question, which was really nice. So right off the bat, you could just like go in and scan the answers before you read the questions and just see which one just did not belong there. I mean, just compared to the other answers, a lot of the times you'll see that one of the answers just doesn't belong there. So right off the bat, you're able to just to get it down to a lot of the times just to three answers, which greatly improves your odds if you do potentially have to guess. I found that there were weirdly a lot of questions that had to do with career counseling and group counseling, which I just don't do very much of in my day to day practice. I do a lot of individual counseling and not anywhere really around career counseling. But I found like there was weirdly a lot of questions that were geared toward that. I don't know why it seemed that way. I don't know if that was intentional. But there, in general, was a pretty good mix of questions. Most of the questions also were kind of geared toward the application of information more so than like knowing the different stages of things or knowing the different levels of things. There are definitely some questions there about pre-contemplation, contemplation, that whole cycle. That just knowing that series was helpful to know. Knowing all the like forming, norming, storming parts of group therapy was, that question I want to say came up a good amount of time as well, or questions around that came up as well. But for the most part, it was a lot of the application of your knowledge. So you might get a question that said something along the lines of, you have a 16-year-old girl that has below average body weight. She has been purging post meals and being secretive about her activities around food. She's lost a significant amount of weight over the last several months. What would this indicate? And anorexia, right? And it would give you the four different questions around like what anorexia could potentially be. But you had questions like that, and then you did have questions that were just like, what's the next stage after contemplation? I didn't find that pacing was much of an issue either. At first, I was pretty on top of how long it was taking me to do the questions, and was getting a bit nervous if I felt like I was taking too long on a question. But at the end of the test, I ended up with about an hour left to take the test still. I remember thinking at one point that I was going too slow, but then, the time is up in the upper right hand corner. So I could see pretty quickly that I was actually on a pretty good pace. But I would recommend just, glancing at the time here and there. But I think they give you more than enough time to complete this test. But that was pretty much it. I wouldn't say this by or wouldn't say this is an easy test. It definitely was. It definitely tested the knowledge, but it wasn't a tricky test. And it wasn't something where they really tried to just drill in to your like serious understanding of what all these different aspects of becoming a counselor and being a therapist really is. It was a thorough test, but I also felt like there was a lot of room for just common sense answers to some of the questions that were written. There were actually a couple of questions that I read and saw the answers and chuckled a little bit because it was just so obvious what the answer was. If you remember, I said something about how the cans of soda water that I kept for the test ended up working against me. At about 10 questions left in the test, I had to go to the restroom. And, my fault. I drank a bunch of coffee before the test, and then I thought that drinking a bunch of soda water during the test would be helpful. I thought I could hold it for 10 questions. And after about five, it became very apparent that I could not. And I tried to notify the proctor, but they were taking way too long. And with 5 questions left, I got up and bolted to the restroom. When I came back, the proctor was on and he said, "I see that you left the video screen during the test." And he ended the test right there with 5 questions left. So I didn't even get to answer the last 5 questions. So you need to be very, very careful about what you drink and if you need to go to the restroom. They'll let you go. If you ask them and wait for them, then you know they will give you permission to go. But if you just leave, they will end the test. Luckily for me, they did not void the test and I had already passed it. Um, and I did actually did pretty well on the test. I got pretty way above what I needed to pass, which was really nice to see and very affirming. Really hope this was helpful and you got something out of this. Like I said, it was very different taking the test 15 years ago versus now, when I had the knowledge of being a therapist. A lot of that was used to answer the questions. Also, I want to assure you that this does not mean I am done with this podcast. I am going to continue doing this podcast. It's actually really fun for me. And I'm also going to talk about other things in episodes beyond just studying information and talk about my experience as a therapist, talk about other things that I think might be helpful, especially for people that are just getting into the field. So I'm really hoping this evolves into something that is a really nice resource for the mental health field and people that are interested in this work. And that's going to be it for this episode. As I said before, I do have a good amount of Quizlet flashcards now under Licensure Lifeline. So make sure you look those up for help with your studying. And until next time, keep on studying. Take care.